In today's video, a marathon runner from Seattle descended into the Grand Canyon at the worst hour of the worst month, convinced her endurance training would carry her where it had killed hundreds of fitter people before her. Two rangers tried to stop her at the trailhead. She filmed them as evidence of overreach. What unfolded over the next 6 hours forced one of them into a recovery she still describes as the slowest of her career, and left a husband at the South Rim refreshing a tracking app that had stopped moving an hour earlier. It was July 14th, 2018, and the South Rim of the Grand Canyon was already preparing for a forecast. No inner canyon hiker should have considered acceptable. The National Weather Service had posted an excessive heat warning the previous evening, predicting inner gorge temperatures of 116 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-afternoon. The trailhead at South Kaibab had been wallpapered with laminated signs in 3 languages explaining what dehydration looked like when it killed people, what the Park Service internally called the death curve, the gap between how long the human body could function in heat and how long the human ego believed it could. By 9 a.m., a ranger named Cassidy Boren, 34, with 11 years inside the park and 3 previous fatality recoveries on this same trail, was stationed at the Kaibab gate with a clipboard, turning back hikers whose water supplies, footwear, or planned itineraries failed her assessment. Marissa Kellner arrived at 9:47 a.m. wearing a road running outfit she had used in 3 Boston marathons. She was 38 years old, a Pilates studio owner from Seattle who had finished her last marathon in 3 hours and 21 minutes, and her social media biography described her as a sub-elite endurance athlete. Her husband Daniel had stayed at the rim that morning to upload drone footage from their lodge balcony. The plan, posted to her Instagram the night before to an audience of about 28,000 followers, was a rim-to-river-to-rim day hike, a route the National Park Service explicitly described on every published warning as something no hiker should attempt between May and September. Marissa had researched the route. She had calculated her splits. She had not calculated for the temperature differential between the rim at 7,000 feet and the river at 2,400 feet, where the radiating rock walls could push effective heat exposure well above the official forecast. Yes, how much water was she carrying? 3 liters. Boren explained that the Park Service recommended 1 liter per hour of hiking and that a rim-to-river-to-rim attempt in July required at least 8 liters with electrolyte replacement, refilled at Phantom Ranch and at Indian Garden if the pumps were working, and that the pumps were not always working. She explained turnaround logic, the rule that descending was deceptively easy, and that climbing out demanded twice the time and 3 times the water. She explained that heat illness compounded silently, that the early symptoms felt like ordinary tiredness, and that by the time a hiker recognized the danger, the metabolic processes producing the danger had already passed the point where rest and water could reverse them. Marissa listened, she nodded, she lifted her phone, and recorded portions of the briefing for content she planned to post later, framing the conversation in a private call afterward to Daniel as institutional fear-mongering. When Boren formally recommended she abandon the hike or restrict it to a turnaround at Cedar Ridge, a 1.5-mile descent, Marissa thanked her, signed the voluntary acknowledgement form the Park Service used to document refused warnings, and stepped past the gate. Boren noted the time on her clipboard. She had seen this exact sequence 8 times that summer. The South Kaibab Trail dropped 4,800 vertical feet over 7 miles of exposed switchbacks with no shade, no water, and no reliable cell service below the first quarter mile. Marissa moved well in the opening descent. Her quads were trained, her cadence was steady, and the cool morning air at the rim made the first 30 minutes feel like vindication of every assumption she had carried into the canyon. By 10:20 a.m., she had passed Ooh-Ah Point, 1.5 miles in. She did not turn around. By 10:55 a.m., she had reached Cedar Ridge, the ranger recommended turnaround, and felt strong enough to continue. She filmed a short clip there, narrating about how the trail had felt easier than her training runs, how the warnings had been overstated, how she was on pace to reach the river by 1 p.m. and back at the rim by sunset. Her water consumption, by her own subsequent reconstruction from her smartwatch logs, had been roughly 400 milliliters in the first 90 minutes. She was already behind on intake. She did not feel behind. She posted a photograph of the canyon view from Cedar Ridge to her Instagram story, captioned with a brief comment about how the warnings did not match the reality. The post received roughly 1,200 reactions in the next 2 hours, none of which reached her again. By 11:30 a.m., she had reached Skeleton Point at 5 miles in, where the trail offered the first long view of the Colorado River, and where the Park Service had posted its most uncompromising sign, a black panel that read in stark white lettering that turning back was the only sensible decision, and that what came next had killed faster runners on better days. The temperature at Skeleton Point registered 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Marissa paused. She drank, she checked her phone, which had no signal but still recorded video, and she filmed the warning sign with a voiceover she later edited but never posted, in which she described the message as written for tourists rather than for athletes. She continued downward. The next 2 miles to the river dropped her another 2,000 vertical feet through a section of trail the rangers internally called the Oven, a stretch of polished shale and exposed sandstone that absorbed solar radiation through the morning and re-emitted it through the afternoon at temperatures that exceeded ambient air by 20 degrees. By 12:45 p.m., she was at the Colorado River. She had descended 4,800 feet in just under 3 hours, faster than her plan called for, and she was already showing signs Boren would have recognized immediately. Her gait had changed subtly, her stride was shorter, her right foot was scuffing slightly with each step, a sign of cerebellar fatigue that often preceded heat-related coordination loss. She did not feel it. She refilled her bottles at Phantom Ranch, where a seasonal ranger named Dale Whitmore, 47 with 19 summers in the Inner Canyon, took one look at her and asked her to sit in the shade for 30 minutes before turning around. Whitmore had recovered 4 bodies from the Bright Angel and South Kaibab corridors in his career. He recognized the early gait shift. He recognized the flushed but dry skin that indicated her sweating mechanism was beginning to falter. He recognized the slight delay in her responses, the way she answered his questions a half second behind the rhythm of normal conversation. He told her, without preamble, that climbing out now was the worst decision available to her, and that she needed to remain at Phantom Ranch until the temperature dropped, sleep at the campground if necessary, and ascend before dawn the next morning. Marissa told him she had a return flight to catch. She thanked him. She started up the Bright Angel Trail at 1:18 p.m. into a temperature reading of 114 degrees Fahrenheit with 9.5 miles and 4,400 vertical feet between her position and the rim. The first hour of the climb performed almost normally. The trail rose gradually along the river before turning into the Devil's Corkscrew, a series of brutal switchbacks that climbed 1,400 feet in less than 2 miles. Marissa's pace, on her watch, had dropped from her descent rate of roughly 22 minutes per mile to something north of 40 minutes per mile, and her heart rate, which had hovered comfortably during the descent, was now reading sustained values above 175 beats per minute. She drank steadily, but the math had already failed her. Her 3 liters were nearly gone. The next reliable water was at Indian Garden, 4 miles ahead. By 2:30 p.m., midway up the corkscrew, she sat down on a rock and did not stand back up for nearly 20 minutes. Other hikers passed her descending. 2 stopped to ask if she needed help. She told them she was resting. One of them, a retired EMT from Phoenix, who later gave a statement to the National Park Service investigation team, noted that her speech was coherent but slightly slowed, and that she had refused his offer of an electrolyte tablet on the grounds that she preferred her own brand. He continued downward with concern. He was the last person to speak to her while she was still capable of forming complete sentences. By 3:15 p.m., she had reached Indian Garden, but had not stopped. Her water bottles were empty. She refilled them, drank, and continued upward without resting in the shade of the cottonwoods, a decision later flagged by every ranger who reviewed her smartwatch trace as the moment recovery became impossible. The shade at Indian Garden, sustained for 40 minutes, would have allowed her core temperature to drop below the threshold at which the body's heat regulation could resume function. She did not give it that time. Above Indian Garden, the trail climbed another 3,000 feet through the Jacob's Ladder switchbacks, a section with intermittent shade that could feel manageable in the morning and became lethal in the afternoon when the trail walls reflected accumulated heat back at climbing hikers. Her pace collapsed. She was now ascending at 65 minutes per mile, slower than walking on flat ground, and her watch logged a heart rate that had crossed 190 and stayed there. By 4:40 p.m., she had stopped sweating entirely. Her skin was hot and dry. She told a passing hiker, a German tourist who later spoke through an interpreter to investigators, that she felt fine and just needed a moment, and her speech was no longer coherent. The German hiker did not have enough English to follow what she was saying, but he recognized something was wrong. He walked the next half mile to find another hiker with a satellite communicator and triggered an SOS at 4:53 p.m. The SOS pinged the Grand Canyon Dispatch Center, which routed it to the Bright Angel Ranger Station, and to Cassidy Boren, who had finished her trailhead shift at 3 p.m., but was still in uniform at the visitor center reviewing the day's intake forms. She recognized the GPS coordinates immediately and recognized the description of the hiker. The location was approximately 1.7 miles below the rim, accessible by descent on foot in roughly 50 minutes for a fit ranger moving without a casualty. Boren and a colleague, Ranger Matt Esparza, were on the trail by 5:08 p.m. with electrolyte solution, ice packs, and a satellite radio. They reached Marissa at 5:54 p.m. She was sitting upright against the rock wall on the inside edge of a switchback, eyes open, unresponsive to verbal cues, her core temperature, when measured tympanically, at 107.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Her watch had stopped recording activity 22 minutes earlier. They began aggressive cooling immediately, packing her with ice, soaking her clothing, lifting her into a shaded stretch of trail, and elevating her legs. They radioed for a helicopter, but the canyon's afternoon thermals at that altitude made the rotor approach impossible until temperatures dropped near sunset. They worked on her for 38 minutes before Boren, who had been monitoring her pulse continuously, looked at Esparza and said the word both rangers had spent the descent dreading. Marissa Kellner had no detectable pulse at 6:32 p.m. on July 14, 2018, at an elevation of 5,300 feet on the Bright Angel Trail. The helicopter arrived at 7:45 p.m. once thermal conditions allowed. The recovery itself was technically straightforward, but emotionally heavy. Boren had warned her at 9:47 a.m. and had stood beside her body at 6:32 p.m., a span of less than 9 hours that she had spent the rest of the summer revisiting. Marissa's husband, Daniel, was located at the lodge restaurant. The notification was delivered at 8:20 p.m. by a senior ranger trained in family liaison, who later recorded that Daniel's first response was to ask whether his wife had been wearing her watch because the tracking app had stopped updating and he had been calling her phone for hours. The official cause of death was hyperthermia, classical heat stroke, compounded by severe dehydration and exertional cardiovascular collapse. The autopsy noted core organ damage consistent with sustained internal temperatures above 105 degrees for more than an hour before her physiological systems failed. The investigation report cited 4 specific decision points at which descent could have been aborted or rest could have reversed the trajectory. The trailhead, where the warning was formally delivered and refused, Cedar Ridge, where the recommended turnaround was bypassed, Phantom Ranch, where Whitmore's instruction to wait was declined, and Indian Garden, where the available shade could have saved her life. The report also noted that her physical conditioning, in the specific form of marathon endurance, had likely accelerated her death rather than delayed it, because trained athletes could continue producing exertional heat past the point at which untrained hikers would have stopped from simple exhaustion. Marissa's last Instagram story remained live on her account for months after her death, the cheerful caption from Cedar Ridge sitting just above the timestamp where her followers had eventually pieced together what had happened. Cassidy Boren left the Park Service 18 months later. Dale Whitmore continued at Phantom Ranch and posted a photograph of Marissa's voluntary acknowledgement form with her name redacted on the wall of the ranger station. He told a journalist the following summer that he kept it visible because the rangers needed the reminder, but the hikers needed it more. The deadliest hour in the Grand Canyon is not measured by clock time, but by the gap between when a hiker should have turned back and when they actually did. Marissa Kellner had 4 chances to close that gap. She refused all 4, and the canyon collected what the canyon always collects from people who arrive believing their fitness will translate into a heat that has nothing to do with fitness at all. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, click on your screen.